Ms. Graham.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We were just coming on to, I was going to ask you some questions about evidence that we've received from Addie Johnson, so Caddy's husband.
Okay.
And we've not heard from him yet. We hope to hear from him. But we've got a signed statement from him, which is evidence that's before the chair. And I'd just like to ask you for some comments.
Yeah, no
on
problem at
it.
all.
Thank you. Could we look at your statement, first of all, your inquiry statement? And you've already been asked about this, paragraph 158. And it says, I've been told, this is Addie Johnson statement. He said, the officers came into my living room and they informed me that Sheku was no longer with us and that he had been pronounced dead in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. My wife was present at the time. I asked how did he come into contact with the ambulance. They said a phone call had been made by a member of the public who lived close to Sheku's house. I asked where was Sheku at the time the call was made to the ambulance, and the police said close to Sheku's house. Looking at that, this is a statement from Addie Johnson to the PERC on the 13th of May 2015. So that's the date that he gave that statement to PERC. And that's a section of it that's in quotation marks. I just wondered if you had any comments about if that was his recollection at the time, how that compares to your recollection about what was said.
Yeah, I don't remember making any mention of that he was pronounced dead in the ambulance on the way to hospital, because it's what I knew at that time that it went to hospital, to be honest, rather than the ambulance. So no, that certainly wasn't said. Regards to the phone call made by a member of the public, I wasn't party to any of that information at that point, so I don't see any reason why I would have said that. I wasn't aware of who'd phoned the ambulance for Sheku.
You hadn't had any information at the briefing about members of the public had phoned in?
No, I don't remember. I've been told a member of the public had phoned in with regards to obviously his behaviour beforehand, but not with regards to like the sort of ambulance stuff and that as well.
I mean, in fairness to you, in the last sentence here, it says they, the police. He doesn't identify individual officers. I mean, in terms of your conversation with Mr. Johnson, does it ring any bells for you?
No.
And can I ask you to look at another statement, the statement to the inquiry by Mr. Johnson, SBPI 00248. And I'm interested in paragraph 3. So we're now turning to Mr. Johnson's inquiry statement here. And this was signed on the 25th of January this year. And he says, the first thing they said was that they were sorry to tell us that Mr. Bayo had left us or passed away. I can't remember the exact words. I asked the question, what happened? And they replied that a member of the public called an ambulance. He was lying on the side of the road and the ambulance picked him up. It was on the way to hospital that he had passed away. They said a family liaison officer would be contacting us. So we just go back to the start of that paragraph. So this is Mr. Johnson's recollection about the first thing that was said when he was told that Mr. Bayo had passed away. Again, looking at that, does that bear any resemblance to your recollection?
No, it doesn't. No.
Can you give any explanation why there would be a difference in his recollection and yours?
I can't, sorry.
So, from what you remember now, at that first visit for the death message, were you aware that members of the public had phoned in about Mr. Bayo?
Yes.
Prior to him going to Hayfield Road?
Yeah, I'm sure that was mentioned at the initial briefing.
So that was something you were
Yeah.
aware of. And what was the extent of your awareness at that time? What did you think they'd phoned in about?
To be fair, I can't remember them elaborating any further than that, just that they had concerns for a male that was out, and I'm sure there was mention of it was possession of a knife. But again, I can't recall anything further than that.
But that's something you were aware of at the time?
Yeah.
That you went to the Johnson's house?
Yeah.
Thank you. And again, in this statement, we see a reference at the very bottom of page 1 in paragraph 3, reference to he, Shekubaya, was lying on the side of the road and the ambulance picked him up. Do you have any recollection of that being said?
No, definitely not.
By you or Wayne Parker?
No, definitely not.
Can we look at paragraph 159, please? Again, going back to your inquiry statement. We may have mentioned members of the public had phoned in about the incident. In a roundabout way, we might have said that. We maybe did say close to the house. It was in the living room. Can you tell me what you mean by this paragraph? You might have mentioned members of the public had phoned in about the incident.
Yeah, when they've asked us questions about it, we may well have said that we made aware of the initial incident by members of the public. Yeah, again, it might have been mentioned that it was close to the house. Can't really recall. With regards to the living room, it's where we were when we were having that conversation, so that's why that is.
Is it quite difficult now to remember the exact words?
It's extremely difficult. I've kind of went over it quite a few times. Obviously, between it gets a wee bit warped sometimes about exactly what discussion was had, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I probably did mention that members of the public had phoned in, but certainly never made any mention that the public had phoned an ambulance. That certainly was never said at any point.
And then looking at paragraph 160, you see, I don't remember seeing the ambulance part. My awareness was that he died in the hospital, not the ambulance. I remember saying he had sadly passed and it was identified as him. I remember saying I can't tell you much else at this point. It's an ongoing investigation. That's what we kept repeating because that's all we were allowed to say and what we knew. And when you say that's what we are allowed to say, what do you mean by that?
Basically directed from our supervisors.
Is that what you referred to earlier?
Yes.
And can you find the source of that, please, for me? I can't find it. Can I ask you now to look at paragraph 164? And again, we're talking about Addie Johnson's perk statement. And it says, I asked, was he in a car accident? They said no. I asked, was he in a fight? They said no. I asked, was he stabbed? They said no. I asked, so how did he die? They said they did not know. I asked if his friend Zahid was dead too, but they said no, he was fine. The police officers said they were looking for two guys and that police were going to a friend's house called Martin, and then it puts in brackets witness Dick. We'll hope to hear from a witness called Martin Dick later in this hearing. I asked if the partner Colette Bell knows, and they said yes. They asked us to contact Colette as she seems to know more about what happened as she had been talking to Zahid. If we can just go back to the top of that page, thank you. So Mr. Johnson recollects asking a number of questions about what had happened in the circumstances and suggesting things to you. Do you remember that part of the conversation?
To be honest, I remember him asking questions. I can't remember exactly what he said, to be honest.
But you do remember him asking a number
absolutely.
of questions?
He was asking a number of questions, again, understandably, at the time.
So you wouldn't disagree with Mr. Johnson?
No, not necessarily, no.
And we see that what he says is that the police were looking for two guys, and he mentions Zahid and he mentions Martin Dick. And I wondered, from the briefing in the morning that you'd had, were you aware that the police were looking for two men, Martin Dick and Zahid,
No,
to take statements from?
Possibly might get mentioned at a separate briefing from what I was at, but certainly from what my job role was that day, they weren't mentioned in it at any point.
So you weren't aware that the police were looking to speak to Martin Dick or Saeed Saeed?
No. I don't know if that had maybe come up in Colette's statement, possibly those names, and that's maybe why it was maybe mentioned, but certainly I never mentioned those names at any point.
Right. Okay. And so if there is any reference to the police looking for two guys, as far as you're aware, there was no connection to Martin Dick or Saeed Saeed?
No.
And can I ask you about what you say in paragraphs 177 and 178? And we see at 177, Mr. Johnson states, and this is in his PERC statement given in 2015, it was the other officer who referred to his notebook. Basically, he read from his notebook. So I think this is the second visit that's being described
Yeah.
here. Holding it in a way his colleague could read it as well. He told me there was a warrant out for the arrest of Sheku and that they were trying to arrest him and he was refusing. Then they had to make a forceful arrest. It was during that process the police realised he was unconscious. They tried to resuscitate Sheku. And at 178 you say, that's absolutely not accurate. Not one part of that is true, other than I was reading out a part of my notebook and Wayne was seeing it. I don't know if there was a warrant for him. I never passed any of that information, none of that detail of police involvement. We never went into specifics at all over or above that statement. We never said anything else. And I want to talk to you about these paragraphs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this, previously I've asked you about things and you've said, well, people were upset, and you've said you don't really remember. But here you're actually saying not one part of that statement is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to go through the lines in that statement just to be clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
You do accept that you had your notebook out and you had the death message written
Yeah,
in
that's
that.
when I was reading out the verbatim message, so obviously DC Parker could see it at the same time what I was reading out.
And we talked about that before lunch, where Dursley had given you
Yes.
that at the point-to-point conversation. And where Mr. Johnson says, he told me there was a warrant out for the arrest of Sheku and they were trying to arrest him and he was refusing. What do you say about that?
I'll be honest, completely honest, the first time I've ever heard a warrant mentioned for Sheku, and I don't even know if he had a warrant, was when I spoke to you in November last year. That has never ever been said to me in any conversation that I've had or read or seen anything from his death. I was not aware of any warrant, if there even was one.
So again, looking at that paragraph 177, we see that there's a reference there from Mr. Johnson to police. He doesn't identify the individual officer that is said to say this, but the description he's given appears to be attributing that to yourself.
Okay.
Because you're the one with the notebook and
Yes,
you're reading out.
Absolutely.
When you say it's not true, are you saying that, and I just want to be clear, are you saying that Mr. Johnson's telling a lie here, or are you saying that he's misremembering or confused, or what's your explanation for this?
All I can tell is categorically myself or DC Parker did not say that within that house. Whether or not the flows maybe made mention of that later on, possibly, but certainly it wasn't mentioned by us at any point.
Certainly, I think you can take it from me at the moment, there was absolutely no warrant out
Okay.
for the arrest of Mr. Bayo that day. That is not correct.
Okay.
Did you find that out? Can I ask you to go back, please, and look at 163? And you say here, halfway down this paragraph, there was a lot of awkward back and forward. This is the discussion that you've had with the family. I don't like lying to people or providing nonsense, so there may well have been more. I remember saying it was an active investigation, people to speak to about and what had happened, and we'd pass on that information when we could. You say, I don't like lying to people or providing nonsense. How often are you asked to lie to people?
No, that's not what I mean there. I'm meaning more that when I was trying to answer the questions, I was obviously trying to be, or I was being as honest as I could. I couldn't really more comprehensive with my answers because I never knew anything really further, only snippets that I'd possibly heard in the office and such like, which I mentioned earlier on. So that's what I mean with that. I certainly wasn't asked to lie at any point during that day, and I certainly didn't lie at any point that day either.
I was going to ask you, did you feel you were lying to
No,
the family?
No, not at all. I felt, obviously, when I made mention of the statements earlier on, I feel as if we weren't elaborating enough on the information that we did have. But certainly never lied at any point of the day and never lied any day since either.
But you weren't in a position to give as much information to the family as you would have liked.
Yes.
So to that extent, you were not able to be as frank with them.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I'd like to move on and ask you some questions about statements by Caddy Johnson, Mrs. Johnson.
Okay.
Can we look, please, first of all, at your inquiry statement 199 to 201? And here you've been referred to a statement from Mrs. Johnson, which she gave to PERC on the 2nd of June 2015. And it says the police officers were sitting side by side, the officer reading his notebook. So again, this is the second visit that's being described here. The officer reading his notebook positioned the notebook in such a way his colleague could clearly read it also. I can remember being told, the police have been involved in a forceful arrest, and during that time they realised Jack was unconscious, and ambulance was called and died by the time he got to the hospital. And at paragraph 201, you say, regards to the forceful arrest, I read out the statement from the notebook, but not forceful arrest. And I didn't say where he died. The hospital staff is from the statement, which made me think it was in the hospital that he died. Can I ask you about this reference to forceful arrest? Do you remember, this is obviously a statement that Mrs. Johnson gave to PERC in 2015.
Yes.
And her recollection at that time would have been fresher to the events. Can you explain, did you use the words forceful arrest when you were speaking to the family in the house?
I read verbatim what was in my notebook, and I believe that said attempted arrest was the only sort of comments around arrest, but certainly the phrase forceful arrest was never used.
Was there anything said to you during that second visit that could have given Mrs. Johnson the impression that you used the words forceful arrest?
Not that I can recollect.
Can you explain why she would say this? I did ask her yesterday and she said her recollection was clear on this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain why she would?
I had no idea. As to say, I read that out verbatim, which has obviously been shared earlier on. That's exactly what I read out. That was the only statement that I had.
Okay. Did you use the word force at all?
No, not that I recollect.
Did Wayne Parker?
No, not that I can remember.
Anyone else in your hearing use the words forceful arrest?
Not that I can remember.
Can I put on paragraph 202 to you so we can have that on the screen? And again, this is a paragraph from Mrs. Johnson's statement to PERC. By that time we all got upset because that reading, we thought the police had killed him, that's Sheku. I thought this because I said to the police officer from a nursing background, you told us earlier today that would be Wayne, you are from a nursing background, I am from a nursing background. I said, this is a black boy you have killed. We are from a big family and this is not going to go down well. Addy was asking questions about who phoned the ambulance. They said a passerby and the police had phoned for an ambulance. I have used the word killed because the police, have used the words forceful arrest, and this is my perception of what has happened. So this is Mrs. Johnson's explanation of her perception at the time. Do you remember a discussion where the Johnsons were told a passerby and the police had phoned for an ambulance?
I can't recall that at all.
And she's saying here, I have used the word killed because the police, have used the words forceful arrest. Do you remember any use of or reference to the words forceful arrest by anyone
Definitely
in
not.
the living room? Can we look at a statement from Mr. Johnson, SBPI 00248, please, at paragraph 11. So this is the inquiry statement that Mr. Johnson has signed and provided to the chair. Paragraph 11. At that time we all erupted in the house. We were very angry because the question was, why did you lie to us? You knew and you sat here and lied to us. We tried to ask what the forceful arrest was. Immediately we asked questions that we're asking today. Was anyone's knee on his neck? What was it? Was there pressure on the back? And we were asking all those questions regarding a forceful arrest. I think they panicked because everybody was so angry and they said they had to leave and they left. So again, the words forceful arrest are appearing here in relation to the second visit. Again, do you have any recollection of what's being said in this
No, I
paragraph?
don't remember
by Mr. Johnson?
any of those questions at all.
Right.
I remember them being quite angry, again, to say it was understandable, but I certainly don't remember those specific questions.
And can I ask you to look at paragraph 206 of your inquiry statement again, please? So it's 206. And this relates to, you were asked to comment on Lorraine Bell's statement to Perk.
Yeah.
And it said, I do recall at least one visit by the two plainclothes officers who we had dealings with in the earlier part of the day. So that would be you and Wayne.
Yes.
Because you dealt with Colette earlier in the
absolutely,
day.
yeah.
And Lorraine Bell is her mother. All I can say about the two officers is that one had a Newcastle upon Tyne accent. Who would that be?
That'll be DC Parker.
And the other had a shaved head. You had the same
That'll be
hairstyle
myself,
then.
yeah.
I recall that the officer with the Newcastle accent said that Sheku's arrest was forceful. This was a shock to me and came very much out of the blue. Do you remember Wayne Parker using the word forceful?
No, definitely not.
Do you remember being in the room with him where he mentioned something along those lines?
No.
And then can I also refer you to Colette Bell's statement? This is her inquiry statement, SBPI 00247. Paragraph 32. So this is the inquiry statement provided by Colette Bell. And she is talking about being in the home of the Johnsons and a conversation then. And she says, I think Addie had said at that point to get the chief of police because I think he worked with him, so he knew him. So he was asking to see him. I think when he came to the house, it was him who had said that it had been a forceful arrest, that CS spray and pepper spray had been used, that batons had been raised and used. I remember him saying that I remember him saying that when they got there. Shek had gone towards him with the knife. I remember them saying that he had hit a female police officer, and I remember thinking there is absolutely no way that they're talking about Shek. As I understand it, when she's talking about this person, that is a reference to Gary McEwen. We've heard that he had a personal connection to Addie Johnson, Mr. Johnson. And I think you've mentioned Gary McEwen already today.
Yeah.
Now, it's Colette Bell's recollection, we've not heard from her yet, but according to paragraph 32, she seems to be referring, she calls him the chief of police, And I think Gary McEwen's a very senior police officer, isn't he?
He was at the time, yes.
He was at the time. And her recollection is that it was him that had used or made reference to forceful arrest. Were you present when Gary McEwen had his discussion with the Johnsons?
I'll be honest with you, I wasn't even aware that he'd went out to the address. That was the first time I've been made aware of that. So no, I wasn't present at the time, no.
So if Colette Bell is correct, and the words forceful arrest were used by Gary McEwen as opposed to you or Wayne Parker,
Yeah.
were you or were you not in the room at that
No,
time?
we weren't there when Gary McEwen was there.
Thank you. And in fact, we certainly know from what we've heard so far that in Hayfield Road there certainly was a use of force and sprays were discharged and baton was used. So there was force used during that arrest.
Yes.
That's not inaccurate or untrue.
No, definitely not.
Right. I don't think there's any dispute about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Thank you. Well, I have a few other little questions I'd like to ask you. Can I ask you to look at Colette Bell's statement, paragraph 22, her inquiry statement, please? SBPI 00247. And it's paragraph 22. And I'd like to look at this paragraph. This is back to Kirkcaldy Police Office, and when you were having you were taking a statement from Colette
Yes.
Bell, and part of that discussion in the interview room.
Yes.
So it's earlier in the day. Then they asked questions about Sheikh himself, if he was religious, if he was a Muslim, how religious was he, did he pray, how often did he pray, did he drink, did he eat bacon? I remember I wasn't really thinking. I just kept answering all these questions. They were asking if I got on well with his family. I was asked if his family had a problem with me being white. Did they have a problem with me not being a Muslim? Did Sheikh want me to become a Muslim? They were asking, was Sheikh ever violent to me? They were asking if Sheikh was a violent person, if he had any enemies, if he had lots of friends, if he was popular. Was there anybody out to hurt him? Did he have anybody that would want to hurt him? I was saying no, Sheikh's the most gentle, most loving, most popular man. Nobody would want to hurt him. He had loads of friends. He was well known in the community. So looking at that paragraph there, there's a number of questions that Colette Bell recollects that were asked of her in the interview room.
Yep.
And I'm particularly interested in the comments, first of all, about questions being asked if Colette and Sheikh got on well with his family. I was asked if his family had a problem with me being white. Did they have a problem with me not being a Muslim? Did Sheikh want me to become a Muslim? Do you remember any part of the conversation that involved that topic of conversation?
No, not at all, because again, it would have no bearing on the statement that was getting noted, so it wouldn't make any sense, to be honest, so no.
Earlier today we talked about lifestyle questions
Yeah.
and building rapport
Yeah.
and putting people at ease. Was any part of that conversation maybe discussing her relationship with Sheikh?
Yeah, I can imagine that was asked. Again, I can't recollect, hopefully DC Parker maybe will be better than me, but certainly would have asked what the relationship was like. I don't remember him asking if he was violent, but that may well have been asked. With regards to him drinking alcohol, that would have been asked as well. Again, that's a sort of lifestyle thing, but with regards to sort of religious questions and that as well, I don't remember any of that getting asked. And again, with regards to him praying and eating bacon, no relevance whatsoever, so I don't really see why that would have been asked.
So certainly looking back now, looking at these questions, a number of them you think would have absolutely no relevance whatsoever
Yeah.
to an investigation at that time.
And I think I would have remembered if it had been asked because it wasn't relevant at all.
But whether or not they were said, many of them wouldn't have any relevance.
No.
And can I ask you now to look at PERC 00260, and this is a statement, I won't ask you to look at that. I'll ask you to look at your own statement. Sorry, I'm juggling around
sorry.
different statements. Your own statement, paragraph 115. Sorry about that. And if we look at 115, we'll see that you're asked about Lorraine Bell's statement. So this is a statement that Colette's mother gave to PERC. And it says, I wish to state that I found some of the points made in questions asked by police to be unusual. What I mean by this is reference to matters such as, did Sheku pray 5 times a day? Did he eat pork? Did he smoke? Did he drink alcohol? I could not understand why such things were asked, given we were led to believe that a body was found on the street. I also thought it was inappropriate that police made reference to racial issues, including questions about whether Sheku perceived that Colette and he faced problems in a mixed race relationship. And again, tell me, do you remember any of those aspects being raised that are raised by Lorraine Bell in her statement?
With regards to asking if he smoked or drinking alcohol, yes, that would have been asked, but again, no, I don't recall any of the rest of that getting asked, and I don't see why myself or Wayne would have asked it anyway.
And then in paragraph 116, you say none of the questions were unusual. The praying things, I don't remember that being asked, and I don't know why it would be relevant. I don't remember Wayne asking. Can I ask you what you mean when you say none of the questions were unusual?
No, I don't understand that. But
This is your statement.
yeah, I think I'm meaning more for the questions that we asked during the time of the statement. None of them were unusual that we asked,
I see.
like those ones.
So you're not
Apologies.
specifically referring to this
No,
questions?
no, I'm meaning
You
more
mean-
the statement in general, the questions that we were asking with regards to lifestyle and other matters.
So the questions that were actually asked by
Yeah.
you or Wayne on
Yes.
the day were not unusual. Would you think that the reference to some of the questions that Lorraine mentions, do you think they are unusual
Yes,
questions?
100%. Whether
What-
someone prays or not is not relevant for a statement, to be honest.
So let's look at those questions and you can tell me which ones you think would be unusual. You've already said a lot of them wouldn't be relevant anyway, but where she says, did Sheku pray 5 times a day?
Not-
Unusual?
Yes,
Irrelevant?
yes.
Did he eat pork?
Same again.
Unusual and irrelevant?
Yes.
Did he smoke?
Yeah, I don't remember it getting asked, but it would have been asked because it's a normal lifestyle question. We would ask for any sort of statement similar to that.
Did he drink alcohol?
Again, we would ask that, and then we'd also ask about drugs as well.
Right. And then later, any questions about Sheku and Colette being in a mixed race relationship?
Again, no relevance whatsoever to the investigation at that point, so it wouldn't have been asked.
And would that also be an unusual question to ask?
100%. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask you again about another paragraph in your inquiry statement, which is paragraph 30. Now, in terms of displaying this, there is an element of that, I think, which has been redacted, but I'm going to read out the whole paragraph. So if you listen along with me, it says, for lessons learned from other police forces, I believe there were case studies sent by DCU. There was a case involving a Chinese national in Edinburgh or Glasgow, a death, also a death down south as well. There was information sent out about these cases. There was no obligation to read it. Now, this is in an early part of your statement, and it's about training.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about the type of training you've had in the police service and awareness
Yes.
of. And I asked you earlier about your awareness of situations down south, or you talked about America, that
Yeah.
type of thing. So tell me what you recall about a case involving a Chinese national in Edinburgh or Glasgow.
I don't know if we were still Five Constabulary at the time, but we used to get sort of case studies sent through, again, just for awareness and obviously learning points and that as well. I can't remember the specifics of it, to be honest, but we were obviously sent it to give it a read, obviously just for awareness. I don't know if it was an inquiry similar to this one, to be honest, but yeah, I remember that, but it's been years and years ago since we were sent them. I don't remember ever getting sent them since we've moved to Police Scotland.
Would your memory have been better in 2015?
Yes, it would have been, yeah.
If I suggest to you that this related to the death of a Chinese man called Simon San in August of 2011, would that ring any bells?
Yeah, that does ring a bell, yeah.
So that was something you'd be aware of in 2015?
Yeah.
The death of a Chinese man, a Chinese national?
Yeah.
And were you aware in 2015 about that being perhaps quite a high profile matter because of the race related aspect of it?
Yeah.
So you were aware in 2015 that deaths could occur in relation to race?
Yes.
And then can I ask you also about another racially motivated murder? Do you remember the Chokar case?
I remember the name, but I can't remember the ins and outs.
All right. We'll probably hear more evidence about this later.
Okay.
But just to prompt your memory, my understanding is that there was a trial initially which collapsed in about 1999. And then a second trial in 2000, and there'd been a number of investigations and public comments made by Lord Advocates and VIPs about the nature of how it had been investigated and prosecuted by the Crown. There were a number of criticisms, very public criticisms about that. And then there was a third trial in 2016. So in 2015, when the events were happening on the 3rd of May, I think there'd been a double jeopardy application. It was very high profile. And ultimately, I think it took about 18 years, but there was a conclusion it had been a racially motivated murder. Do you remember much about that at the time?
No, I don't, to be honest. I think maybe one of the things that maybe discussed when we were at the college in 2007 with regards to it, because it's a sort of vague memory of it, but I can't generally remember the ins and outs.
Could you just give me a moment,
Yeah.
please? And I've been asked just to clarify one. Oh, sorry, I've been asked to clarify one last thing about the Chokar case. It was marred. The police investigation was marred. Subsequently discovered that it had been due to institutional racism. Do you remember anything about that?
No, I don't know.
Do you remember about the implications of that being shared with you as a police officer?
I can't. It maybe was, but I generally can't remember.
Well, we may hear more evidence about that in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any Rule 9 applications? No. Well, thank you very much, Sergeant, for coming to give evidence to the inquiry.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to rise briefly in order that the next witness can be introduced, and you'll be free to go then.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Sergeant Parker.
Go ahead.
Can I put you on oath before you give your evidence, please?
Yes, sir.
Will you raise your hand and say the words, I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Current rank?
It's Sergeant.
And in 2015, were you a detective constable?
I was, yes.
How many years service do you have now?
It's just under 16 years now.
And do you have a Newcastle accent?
I do, yes. Yeah.
And in 2015, did you have about 8 years service?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And were you working on the 3rd of May 2015 with Andrew Mitchell?
I was eventually, yes.
I don't know if you've seen any of the evidence that we've taken in the inquiry, but you will see a blue folder sitting in front of you. That should contain a hard copy of the statement that you've given to the inquiry team and any earlier statements as well. I think there's an operational statement, a PERC statement that you've given.
Okay.
Please feel free to refer to those at any
Yeah.
time that you wish. They're for your use. When I'm referring to a particular paragraph and maybe
Mhm.
asking for more details,
Okay.
it'll come up on the screen in front of you. So if you're comfortable using the screen, you don't need to look at the
Okay.
folder, but it's there if you do want to look at it.
Okay.
Can I ask you first of all to look at your operational statement, which is PERC 00023. And I think you'll see that this is your operational statement that you wrote yourself on the 3rd of May 2015, and it says at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If we go down the page a little bit. And it was prepared by you at Leavenmouth Police Station, or Leavenmouth Police Station.
Yes.
Is that, you recognise
Yeah.
that? And let's just quickly go through that and just scan through it. And I think it's only a couple of pages long, really, is it? Well, I shouldn't say a couple, but actually it's maybe 2, and then at the end there's a,
Yeah.
a 3rd page with some
Yeah.
blank confidential information. So it's a brief statement. Can you tell us what the purpose of preparing that was?
Yeah, usually at the end of an incident where you're involved in an inquiry, if the inquiry's still ongoing when you've terminated duty, majority of DCs, detective constables, prepare an operational statement, which is the pertinent point to that officer for that day, which is so much as a brief one, which can usually be expanded on at a later date. It's for report purposes for the fiscal, and to assist inquiring officers as to what's been done that day.
So you were just putting down the briefest of details on that day,
Yes,
which you could then expand on in the future.
yes,
And I think if we go back to your, well, I don't need you to do this at the moment, but I think in your inquiry statement to the chair, you've said that you were doing your best on the 3rd of May 2015 to give a true and accurate note of what you'd been involved in.
that's correct, yes.
And I think you also say at paragraph 8, which we'll look at later, is that your recollection of events then would have been better than it is now.
Yes.
Many officers have said their memory then would have been better.
Yeah, I think due to the passage of time, definitely. Yes.
Now, we've heard from your former colleague, Andrew Mitchell, that he had been asked by his sergeant to beef up his operational statement. And his was also brief, although not as brief as yours, but he was asked to add to it in terms of the detail,
Yeah.
the connection with the family. Were you asked to beef up your statement?
I can't remember having to beef it up, but I remember being told could probably expand on it, what we had, a bit more detail, timings and such like that. Quite fastidious about timings, so my notebook covers all the timings within that as well, so added timings and a bit more expanded on certain points.
So this statement that we see here, was that expanded upon by you?
I think it was expanded on when we'd been made aware by PERC. I think at the time wanted a fuller statement, so I expanded on that.
So when we look at a later statement, this is dated the 2nd of June, it's PERC 00024, please, if we could look at that. And this is a separate statement, although it's been moved very quickly onto the screen. And this is dated the 2nd of June 2015 at 17:05. And it was taken by DSI Brian Dodd at Kirkcaldy Police Office. So this is taken on a later date.
Yes.
And this is from PERC. And when you talked a moment ago about expanding, was this the statement in which you expand on your involvement on the 3rd of May?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it covered the points that probably the ones that PERC was wanting to ask around, and just more expanded on certain points of the pertinent points of our involvement. So that was the one we expanded on for that date.
I can ask you something else. Andrew Mitchell has said that when he prepared his own operational statement, that he would be typing it, be sitting in a room and maybe get his memory jogged through a conversation with you. Do you remember that happening, having a discussion about your statements? Or?
Yeah, every individual officer completes their own statement. It's their recollection of events, and obviously my pertinent points regards to Andy will be completely different, and rightly so. We were probably sat at the table just around from each other because everyone's in that room. He's probably asked me timings, can remember what time we went there, can remember this time, or can remember what we've done there. And it's just a job what we've done for that day, because there's a lot going on from that morning all the way through to termination of duty. So it's more not directing each other, more trying to remember what we've done that day. And especially the fact you'll see in my notebook, I've got timings for everything. So and just to remember what time we went everywhere.
And so to that extent, you would have helped him complete his operational statement?
Not so much help, more if he said, can you remember what time we went there? So I think I've got a time in my notebook, hang on. That's probably about it.
Do you remember now any specific parts where you assisted Andrew Mitchell with jogging his memory in that way?
No, definitely not now.
And equally, do you remember any specific parts where your conversation with him maybe helped to jog your memory in relation to your statement?
Maybe I think because the to and fro and back and forth from addresses, we would probably discuss that. Can you remember, did we go back that time? Which way we come? Did we come back to the station or not? That sort of thing. Nothing that's going to impact on the specific evidence and like that, just more the timeline of where we went, because it was back and forward all day. Pardon me.
Andrew Mitchell's told us about various events that happened during that day and the sequence of those events.
Yeah, probably the sequence, that is the more sort of the jogging of the sequence of things, because we were, as I say, we were at various different points and back and forward a few times. So I've no doubt we probably discussed the sequence of events.
Yes. And then can we look please at your inquiry statement now, which is SBPI 00238. And you see this is your witness statement. It says DC Wayne Parker, taken via Teams on Wednesday the 2nd of November 2022. So this is the inquiry statement that you've given to the inquiry.
Yes.
And it's 48 pages long, and although we will not see it, if we move to the very last page, although we won't see, because of redactions, your signature, you will be able to tell in the hard copy in front of you in the folder that you've signed every page.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
And on the last page, we'll see that you signed that on the 13th of January this year. Is that
Yes.
correct? And the last paragraph is 250, and it says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And that was your understanding when you signed it?
Yes, I understood that at the time.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask you, let's look at paragraph 34, that sort of area. You were asked initially about the training that you had yourself and the nature, your background.
Yes.
And we've heard evidence that you used to be a nurse or have a nursing background.
Yeah, I was a nurse prior to joining the police. I was a nurse for about 8, nearly 9 years.
That's quite a change in career.
Yeah, just a wee bit.
Why was that?
Yeah, I'd initially went to join the police, but I had quite a bad accident, so I couldn't get in the police at the time because of damage to my leg. So, fortunate enough, I went to the orthopaedic ward and was operated on, joined the police after that. So,
I see.
which was very lucky.
That is
But
good.
no, I think the training I received from there certainly, people speak about transferable skills, and in my job it's been quite beneficial throughout my career, in more so now.
And in what way can you identify or give us some examples of transferable skills that you've found beneficial?
Yeah, whilst I was in the hospital, I was a lead for teaching sort of junior nurses, and then in the last part of my training was teaching third year doctors and degree level students clinical skills and patient treatment, how to just active listening skills with people at the time, which is a huge beneficial thing, especially for this in passing death messages. I think the problem with death messages, it was a lot easier in hospital because predominantly a lot of people come to hospital quite ill, and it's not expected that they're going to pass away, but it's certainly in the back of people's mind. But in policing, it's not the case. You could be turning up somebody's door who's just seen their partner or loved one the night before, and you're turning up and saying that they've died, which is it's quite different. But it's prepared me a lot better to pass them death messages, albeit it's probably the worst part of the job that we'll have.
And I think at paragraph 34 you say you haven't had specific training in liaison with family members in a death case. But I was in a position where I had been a nurse, so I had that toolkit to use. I had an empathetic side. It's been commented on by families. It's harder in policing because people aren't expecting people to pass away, whereas in hospital they might be more expecting their family members to die. My bosses know about this toolkit. I'm not a family liaison officer, but I have these skills for that empathetic side of people. So when you say that your bosses know about this toolkit, a couple of questions. Which bosses are you talking about?
Through my career, my senior management have been reported on positively regarding especially cases of just emotional sort of incidents, very much like this, the death of a loved one, a high-risk missing person. I've been involved in a lot of cases like that because I tend to have that sort of way of speaking to folk who need that information, and it's all about, to be honest, information, providing families with information about the incidents that's happened.
And how much experience of delivering death messages did you have prior to the 3rd of May 2015?
Within the police or prior to that?
Let's start with the police.
I couldn't put a number on it, to be honest. There's various ones you get within force and then out with force from other areas, neighbouring areas that one family member's contacted, which kind of it's a lot harder when you haven't been involved in it because you haven't got the basis of the family knowledge and you're going in sort of cold feet to a family that you don't know. So I couldn't put a number on it. There's a few, because I was in the community team straight out of probation, so in the community team you tend to help a lot more with that sort of side of things.
In the 8-year service you had before the 3rd of May 2015, although you might not be able to put a number on it, can you tell us how often you'd maybe had to deliver a death message?
It's kind of guessing how long's a piece of string, I'm being honest. I'd probably have to look back and try and recollect a lot of the ones that stand out. You probably remember a few of them, probably up to about 10 maybe in that time, and usually maybe 1 or 2 a year, if that. Yeah.
Had any of them been deaths in custody?
No.
Had you delivered a death message to a black family before?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
You've talked a moment ago about having a toolkit through nursing. Can you tell me a little about the toolkit?
I think majority of everyone, I think, has got that sort of, if you haven't got that human side to you, and there's something sort of wrong. But I was in nursing for the right reasons, and I enjoyed that sort of side of it, where it's being there for people and showing that sort of compassion to what's happened and having that empathy side and not so much speaking at people, listening to what they have to say to you. It's a sounding board a lot of the times, but just actually being there.
Mm-hmm. And can I ask you about any training you'd had in race awareness? I think paragraph 36, you were asked about this in your statement. You say you have had training in race awareness, and you mention your nursing background. Can you tell us a little bit more about any race awareness training you had?
Yeah, I had prior to the police quite a lot of it. In the police, obviously being in the hospital, you come across all diverse backgrounds within the hospital. In the police, I was trying to think about this the other day. When we first started training, pardon me, I think it's within the first period, during the first month, we get a lot of diversity training and protected characteristics, sort of race, religion, gender and age sort of thing. And it's emphasised and backed up a lot as it is now, which I really don't agree with Moodle sort of packages, which is online, but it's obviously monitored. But a lot of that is backed up on a yearly basis, which is, I think it was a recent one came out this week. I came off annual leave, so there's one this week as well, on diversity actually.
You said you don't agree with Moodle. We've not heard much about Moodle. I'm sure we'll hear
I know,
more.
That's my personal opinion.
Tell us about it.
I think I'm a very kind of old school face-to-face teaching from when I taught at the university. I think online Moodle packages have their place, i.e. distance learning, things like that, but in policing it's quite hard to keep track and how much degrees knowledge is taken in. But that's my opinion.
Do you think those online packages create a barrier to learning and absorbing that information?
I think it's more absorbing the sort of cyclical aspect of learning doesn't conform to that. You can read through it and probably not take it in. But I think everybody has different ways of learning. It doesn't suit mine. I'm very sort of classroom face to face, so I find it quite hard to learn that way from computers. But
all right. And you mentioned that you'd had training in race awareness when you were a nurse.
Yes.
What about when you were in the police force or police service?
As in your first, as I say, the first few months about race awareness during that time, in different religions and cultures, and genders and that as well during that time. It's right at the very start of the training, I think it was.
So by the time you had 8 years service, had you had any additional training in race awareness?
I'm trying to think back. I'm sure there's some annually throughout that period, but I can't really pin down exactly when it was, but it was definitely training throughout.
At paragraph 38, if we could look at that. You say there was definitely one last year, a race training course, maybe? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
It was, I think that was on the intranet. I noticed it, so it comes up in highlighted things on the intranet regarding diversity and race awareness. I'm sure it was last year.
Did you do that course, attend that course?
Yeah, probably read through it, yeah.
Read through it. How long did that take?
Honestly, couldn't tell you.
Was it lengthy or was it a short?
Honestly, I'd be lying if I said so. I couldn't really see how long it was short or not. A lot of the Moodle packages can be anything from take over 2 days or up to a couple of hours to do them, so they're all varied depending on content.
Are they generally done when you're on duty?
Yes, yeah.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 44? And you've said here, by May 2015, you didn't have any experience in investigating a death in police custody.
Yeah.
So this was your first involvement in this type of situation.
Yes, it was.
Had you been involved in any cases which involved the death of a black man?
I'm trying to think. No, I don't think so. I'd probably have to look through a lot of my CID stuff and just to make sure. But no, not I'm aware of, not on 5.
Right. Can I ask you to look, please, at paragraph 61? We have to be transparent anyway. The public have to have a degree of comfort that we're transparent. There wasn't any suggestion that morning that there was criminality. 62, I wouldn't deal with it differently because the man was black. All creed, colour, whatever, it didn't change how I dealt with it. Him being black didn't make a difference. I don't think anyone else did anything different because he was black. We just had a male in contact with the police. My personal opinion and personal value and everyone I worked with, I've not come across anyone who deals with people of different ethnicity different. A man with a knife was all it was. Sorry, a male with a knife was all it was. I had comfort that more than one person reported him having a knife. On this occasion, there were many calls coming in. It was a male with a knife acting erratically. Can I ask you a little bit more about this? A number of officers have given evidence that they're saying we treat everybody the same. But do you understand that people from different backgrounds may need to be treated slightly differently?
Yeah, I think more so, and it's kind of going back to again, being a nurse and especially being a male nurse, and it was a female dominant area, and a lot of patients in the ward I was in was a female ward. Okay.
Sorry,
Right.
give me a moment. There's a
Right.
lot going on here, isn't there? Is there anything? We don't have to worry about any of this. It's not going to interrupt us.
Right.
Yeah, we've heard from others that to be fair to everybody, you may need to tailor the way you deal with people.
Yes.
It sounds like you understand that from at the very least your nursing background.
I think more so now. I think it's because I taught nurses at the time, and I do the same with sort of probationers. One size doesn't fit all. It sounds a generic sort of thing, but one size doesn't fit all. People come in all different shapes and sizes, races, gender, age, whatever. You can't say I treat everybody the same, because I personally don't, and never have. And that's the way I have worked as a nurse, and it's benefited me throughout my police career to get the rank that I am now. And I impart that on my cops that I teach on a daily basis, because you can't say I treat everybody the same, because you don't. I don't personally treat anybody the same. A prime example for that is
Before you give me that example, could I ask you to pull the microphone slightly closer to you?
Yeah.
Because as you sit back, you're further away from it, and I want to make sure that the transcriber can get absolutely everything written down. So you were just about to go on and give us an example.
Yeah, it has to. A lot of it has to be led by patient. I think when I was a nurse, it was patient-led care. In policing, it pretty much reflects that a lot of the times, especially dealing with serious incidents. The person who's getting a statement noted can actually say, I don't want a female officer, I don't want a male officer, can have some, and they're well within the rights to say that. With certain religions, it'll be very, very similar. In an incident what we had only last week, we have a person who's transitioning from male to female, and they have an option how to be searched, whether it be male or female, as their choice, as long as the officer's happy and comfortable with doing that. And it has to be led by that person at that time, because if that person says, I am male, and they're being searched by a female, then you're then important on the human rights, and everyone can be treated the same. So that's a way that I deal with everybody. Not everyone's the same.
So there's not one uniform way of doing anything?
No.
You try to take account of individuals' preferences, perhaps their religion, their gender or their sex, or preferences that they express.
Yeah, you can't go wrong even if you just align it with what I've tried to explain to guys. Is you look at the protected characteristics, and that's a lot for a starter for you to understand that when you speak to people.
And just to stop you there, protected characteristics, you're referring to the Equalities Act?
Yes, yeah.
And so you tell people that you work with have, bear in mind, protected characteristics.
Especially where I work at the moment, I work at St Andrews. We have a quite an expanse across the world of students from every single country, which is in this small place. So you're getting every single race, religion, everywhere in this compact place, which is the bubble of St Andrews. So you have to be aware of that, especially working in that area as well.
So is this something that you come across personally in your work on a regular basis?
It depends who you deal with it. As I say, if it comes across, then you have to be aware of how you treat these people on an individually basis, not as a general one-size-fits-all.
So not one size fits
No.
all, but more bespoke or tailored to that particular person.
Yeah.
Right. And so, although you've said in paragraph 32, I wouldn't deal with it differently because the man is black, you would take account of people's individual, if you're dealing with a black person, you would take account of perhaps their religion or their preferences or cultural preferences that they'd expressed.
Yeah, you take cognizance of that. Be aware of that. Be aware of the person present as black. There may be an inkling that there may be a religion or something impacting on your decisions after that. So you'd have that in your back of your mind, thinking how you'd be dealing with that, obviously. But when I first seen the call card, from a risk assessment point of view, it was male with a knife. The colour of the gentleman's skin doesn't come into it at that point, and that's not what we're dealing with. That's not a risk factor to me. That's nothing. As I say, everyone's dealt with individually, but not differently just because someone's described as black on a call card. It's a male with a knife. That's what I'm personally speaking from now, from as a risk assessment point of view, as a sergeant as well now.
So you're more experienced, you've got higher rank now than you did in May 2015.
Yeah.
Was this something that you were aware of in 2015, that you should treat people in a different way if
I've kind of, as I've touched, I've carried that throughout my career from my 10 years of nursing into policing, and as I say, it's stood me a good stead since then. And I've been positively reported on from numerous high-risk misper cases and people passing away from family members.
And just for the transcriber's benefit, you said a misper case, and that's a missing person, isn't
missing
it?
person, yeah. You can revert to police speak sometimes.
And you mentioned that you'd seen the call cards. We've heard of storm cards as well.
Yeah.
They're the same thing.
Yes.
When did you first see the call cards or the storm cards in relation to this incident involving Mr. Bio?
So my base post on that day was Leedmouth. In the morning, part of our duty says to review call cards that's come in from the night before. So sift through call cards, what's happened in the Fife area. That morning, before the morning briefing, I saw the call card come in. I think through experience, a lot of cops will tell you the same. A lot what's on the call card is not necessarily what's happened. So when you get one call card that comes in and says, male with a knife, you think, right, hang on a minute, and then you wait until you get a wee bit more information, and then you make a decision from there. That morning that had came in, and then we got a phone call shortly after saying there'd been an incident in Kirkcaldy with the night shift, and my sergeant came through, can we head through Kirkcaldy?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Sorry. I just didn't catch what you said. You said the night shift came in and you...
Yeah. The night shift had an incident that had come in through the hours and early hours of the morning, and there'd been a phone call to office saying, and I'd already seen the call card beforehand, saying there'd been an incident, could we come through to give a hand with the day shift.
So you were asked to go through to Kirkcaldy that day to help the day shift on the 3rd of May.
Yes.
Who asked you to go through?
I think it was DS Dursley came through and said to myself and Callum Clayton that we were needed in Kirkcaldy, we'll go through for a briefing.
So you and Callum Clayton were asked by DS Dursley at that time. And where was Andrew Mitchell? Was he with you or
no? I think he was stationed at Glenrothes at the time.
But you came together when you got to Kirkcaldy, the three of you.
We all met in Kirkcaldy for the briefing in the CID room. Yeah.
And who was in charge when you got to Kirkcaldy that day?
From my recollection, I think I'm sure it was the DI Robson. I think it was DI Robson. It was the DS from the night before, who was Sammy Davison, who I think is an inspector now, and DS Dursley, who's an inspector now as well. That's a face I recognised at that point then.
Right. So when you arrived at Kirkcaldy, there was D.I. Robson.
Yeah.
You think he was in overall charge?
Yeah,
There was D.S. Samantha Davidson.
Yes.
You called her Sammy.
yeah, yeah,
And D.S. Dursley. We've heard
Yes.
of Graham Dursley.
yeah,
And there was a briefing,
yeah.
we understand, at that point when officers arrived in the
Yeah.
morning. Do you remember what was said to you at the briefing?
Yeah. I can't remember exactly what was said. I think the rough information that we had was basically had been an initial call came in which I'd seen on the call card. I wasn't aware of any other ones after, but we'll listen to the radio. And there'd been a couple of calls after that regarding a male that was acting erratically with a knife. So there's been one and there's been a following couple of call cards. Following that, cops have attended. There's been the attempted arrest on a male, and then he's come to the ground of I think the word was he became unconscious at that time and he's been taken away by an ambulance and he's been taken to hospital at the moment. That was what we had at that time. That was basically the crux of what was happening as far as it was. Along with that, because the location of where on Hayfield Road it occurred, there was another call card in the Kirkcaldy area which was very, very close. Both time frame and the location, it was probably about a couple hundred metres up in the direction where the male had travelled from, was for an insecure premises of a female who rang in that the house was insecure. It was tentatively connected between the two because the male had come from that area. And I'm only surmising because of the presence of the knife and thought that this might be actually the location of where an incident was possibly happened. So that was the tenuous sort of link at that time. And that's what we received. And then from the briefing, I think it seems like a lot going on at the time. So the DCs are just waiting to be, the way it sort of works out is you get put into inquiry teams. So you have investigative strategy, which basically to keep the inquiry ongoing, you get separated into groups to have your whole strand of an inquiry. So we were given to contact the female who was at the house there, and that was our objective for that day, for that morning.
And we've heard that you and Callum and Andrew went to the house of Colette Bell, and
right.
she was the female who had made the call to the police
That's
about
correct.
an insecure property.
Yes.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 55, please? Well, 54 first of all. I think you say in your statement that at that time you did not know if the man was deceased. You just say that at the very last line of paragraph 54, and then it goes on to the next page. So at the time of the briefing, you didn't know that Mr. Bio had died.
Mhm.
That's correct?
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
And you were to secure the house, which was a source of the incident. So at that time, you thought you knew you thought there was a connection.
I
is
think
that
there was a reasonable suggestion, there was a tenuous link to it. So from there, it looks like we were told to go and secure it. At that point, it wasn't. It was just a tenuous link. It could have been unrelated, but I think because of the locality and the time period, especially the timeline of when the male's been seen in the house is insecure, at that time, there was a potential that it could be the source of where the incidents happened. So we were sent up to establish that. And basically, at that time, I think that call was being treated as a concern for a female who's reattended a house that's insecure. And that was the concern there.
During the briefing, was there any discussion about the police looking for two men?
No.
Do you remember any discussion during the briefing about the police looking for a man called Martin Dick or a man called Zaid Saheed?
No, I hadn't heard any names mentioned at that point at all. The only time I became aware of them names was during the statement from Colette Bell. That's the only time I came into recognition of them.
So that'd be later on that
Yes,
day?
yeah.
We'll come on to that in a moment. During that briefing, I think at paragraph 55, you say, did you know of any of my colleagues considering this was an investigation into potential criminality by police officers? No, definitely not. So at that time of the briefing in the morning of the 3rd of May, were you aware of anyone talking or speculating about criminality on the part of the police?
I certainly wasn't aware of any sort of criminality being suggested at all at that point. I can't sit here and say I didn't know anything was ongoing. I knew that cops had been held back. And there was talk of cops being held downstairs. But I only presumed that because they were involved in the incident, but I knew there was officers from night shift still there. That's all I knew. I never heard, didn't hear anything of criminality-wise. But that's not unusual a lot of times to secure clothing from people regarding an incident that's ongoing. So I didn't really think anything at the time.
Right. And when you say cops being held back, what
Yeah.
do you mean by that?
So the night shift from the previous evening who were involved, I was aware that the officers had been involved in the incident were downstairs. And that was just through heard coming up the stairs that cops are still here. So
Were people talking about the incident in Kirkcaldy that day?
wasn't so much talking about it, it's more heard that officers were being kept back. And that's all I heard on the, because our sort of path to that, we'd went straight in for the briefing, got our briefing, allocated our task, and then straight out. And I'm not going to sit here and say you don't hear police chat. It's like any office. You come out and you hear bits and pieces. You're coming. Kirkcaldy's quite a windy stairs, so there's lots of officers down there. And officers are why the cops been kept on from night shift. So obviously I was aware as we left that was somebody being kept on. So that was my only awareness regarding that.
So there was discussion going on in
Yeah.
Kirkcaldy. Were you aware at that time, at the time of the briefing on the morning, of anyone considering a possible racial element or a racial angle to this incident?
No.
Was anyone considering possible racial discrimination on the part of the police?
No, not that I was aware of at all.
Who would have been considering those things if they were being considered?
It'll probably be assessed by the SIO. SIO probably does the policies and the decisions from there when the inquiry starts up. Well, that'll be taken into these kind of, they use a sort of police investigative hypothesis as to what's happened. Would they put that in? I don't know. I can't speak for what they had in the SIO's log. I don't know.
Right. So we may actually hear from another witness about investigative hypotheses where they think about the possible causes of the death and they investigate each of them to either rule them out or rule them in.
It has to be. You have to investigate, certainly from, I mean, that's me being CID majority of my career until recently. You have to sit on the fence regarding everything. You can't just walk up to someone and say, well, that's happened and that's why. Every eventuality has to be taken into account until it's chalked off till you get the actual inquiry itself. So every avenue has to be sort of pursued, if you know what I mean.
So the police have to keep who are doing the investigation have to keep an open mind
Yeah.
about all the possibilities and investigate those to either rule them in or rule them out.
Yeah.
And is that the normal approach that you would expect during an investigation where someone has died?
Yeah, I would definitely. Yeah.
And could you look at paragraphs 57 and 58, please? You say at the outset of an investigation, we're wanting to secure any evidence. The primary thing with policing is to preserve life. On this occasion, the gentleman has passed away. We were to secure locuses of the potential deceased and the locus where the incident happened and any witnesses. We couldn't rule out criminality on the part of police officers. We can't rule out anything at the start. At the time the male has been taken away, it could have been anything. So at that stage in the investigation, were you personally thinking we can't rule out anything, including criminality on the part of the police?
Of course you can. As I've said before, we have to be transparent. This isn't I'm under no illusion, this isn't the 1970s. This is 2023, and it has to be transparency. It's to provide confidence from the public, and you have to be open above board with stuff like this to keep that confidence from the public.
You're talking about how you have to be transparent now in 2023. What do you think in 2015, the attitude? It wasn't the 70s then either,
Yeah.
but had they moved away from that attitude from the 70s, or?
I can honestly say you get from many professions, you get classed as prehistoric, if I have a better word, in a profession. I've seen people who have retired and things like that, but I don't think policing is what it was in them days, certainly from the 80s. I've got family members who were officers in that era, but it's not, I've certainly not seen anything that reflects anything, and it has to improve as things go on. I've no doubt it's improved from 2015, but I can't see it all that much changed from then. I still think even then as a young cop, everything was transparent then, but more so now, I think. And I think it has to improve as things go. It has to be.
And do you see the benefits of that transparency
Yeah, completely.
in your daily
Yes.
work?
Yeah.
We've heard some evidence that that transparency can build trust and build
Mhm.
rapport with
Yeah.
members of the public, and building that trust and that rapport can have long-term benefits in investigations as
Yeah.
well as other ways.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would to a certain extent. However, on the flip side of that, it can be to the sort of negative impact of an inquiry. Sometimes I've been on inquiries where a lot of information has to be withheld for a certain time, and it sounds awful. Me personally, I would love to went to the family the first day and says this is what's happened, but it would have been a negative impact on the inquiry because no one knew at that time. As I said before, we have to be transparent to a degree, but me as a DC was directed by the SIO's policy, and if meant me giving any further information, an impact on the outcome of this inquiry, then I wouldn't be doing my job properly either. So there has to be a balance, I think. That's my personal opinion, there has to be a balance.
Let me just ask you a few more questions about that. You said that there could be inquiries where there are particular circumstances where
Yes.
you'd want to withhold information.
Yeah.
Could you give the Chair an example of where it might be, or you think it might be appropriate to withhold information?
I think if you're looking for an outstanding suspect, say, and you're divulging information regarding a certain crime, and it's going to impact on you getting any further evidence on that person or sufficiency for to get that person into custody, then you'd have to retain information. On that morning, I think no one knew what we had. I had to have that open mind. And I think, as you see for the messages, as identification's been confirmed, the messages have changed. Could we have been better at it? I think we probably could have. But it's a learning curve for everyone, and I can totally understand why they withheld certain parts of it. But I think a degree of being honest with the family and passing that death message to both Colette and Carrie at that time was before it got out into the social media, because everyone's aware how quick things, and I think the worst possible thing for a family is finding out third hand from the public, which is awful.
We may hear that, with the speed at which social media and
Yeah.
information is out there, that has become even more of a priority as the years have gone by.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of thing you're referring to?
Yes, yeah.
Where information is very quickly disseminated?
Yes.
Yeah. When we're thinking about inquiries where it may be appropriate, or there may be circumstances where it's appropriate to withhold information, in your experience, would it have impacted this inquiry or this investigation on the 3rd of May to have shared with the family that Mr. Bio died after coming into contact with the police?
This is my personal opinion regarding it, so this probably isn't the police's opinion. I think it would have probably benefited the family, if I'm being honest, because when we passed that last message, we got up, the family sort of exploded, and rightly so. And the aggression towards us was more born out of frustration because of lack of information. And I could totally empathise with that, because I'd be exactly the same. I would want information. So it's never easy to get to pass that sort of thing. And I think that initial one, when we passed that information, what would we have lost personally? I don't think that much. At least it would have been upfront and honest, and they wouldn't have been provided with information from social media or given another death message and another death message. That's my personal opinion. Looking back on it, in hindsight's great. At the time, you have to make operational decisions that fit the investigation. But
And you've said a lot there. Can I ask you to go through that again? You said that delivering that second death, we've heard from Andrew Mitchell this morning about the first death message being delivered to the Johnsons and then the second. You said the family's reaction was born from frustration because of lack of information. And is that, in your experience, what gave rise to the problem?
I didn't take anything personally the way they reacted. It's raw emotion. I've lost a cousin this year, and the lack of information, it tears families apart, and they just want information. And I knew what they wanted, and we tried to explain as much as we could. We were restrained under a, you will provide this and nothing more, nothing less. And that is what we had to keep saying. We can only give you this because it's ongoing. I would love to have given them more information, put their mind at rest a little bit. It wouldn't have given them any consolation, but it would have answered a few questions as to what's happened that day, because we left them with nothing very much, to be honest.
And how would that have helped, from your own personal experience of this, how would it have helped the family?
I think it would have been, if for me, if it had given them a wee bit more context from the start, it wouldn't have been this shock factor of, even though I don't think we're trying to mislead them via messages, there was reasons why the message changed as information came in, and it was confirmation of identification. Once that identification was confirmed, it probably would have been easier to have just said, this is what's happened this morning, following an incident whereby he's contacted by police and an attempted arrest on Shekubai is resulted in becoming a cancer. If that had been disclosed probably earlier, it wouldn't have had the family thinking, why are we being given yet another explanation to it. I think their concerns were for that whole, there's an expansive time period through that day, that timeline for that day, to have their messages passed over must have impacted on them. They were sitting there waiting, and we've come to give another death message within 10 minutes, which is different from the one previous. So I've no doubt I would have been exactly the same. I would have been frustrated.
And you say you would have disclosed if it had been disclosed earlier. How much earlier would you think a death message should have been disclosed?
I'm merely just suggesting from my opinion what might have helped and might not have helped. So,
what benefits can there be from disclosing a death or providing a death message earlier or as early as possible?
I think once identification is confirmed, I don't see any reason why we couldn't have just passed it then and said this is what's happened. There has to be an investigation into it, so I can understand that there has to be a way off between the both. But obviously it isn't my decision to make that.
We've heard different evidence from different people about how they maybe weren't 100% sure that the identification was that it was Shekubai. And then we've heard other information about they were almost 100% sure, or they were convinced, or they could see there was a link. And when you say when the ID is confirmed, there should be a death message, what do you mean by confirmed? Are you talking 100% or something less than that? Yeah,
realistically, I think to go to family with the full context of what's happened, there has to be a positive ID, a confirmed 100% identification, whether it be from a friend, family member, or potentially social media image or anything like that, just to confirm 100%. On the flip side of that, the first time we went, we did not have that 100%. We had a lot of things were suggesting that it was him. Were just about there due to there's numerous things I'm sure we'll discuss them anyhow that suggested it was him, and I think passing that death message, we had to do something to speak to Colette regarding that, rather than her find out that it was him an hour or two later. We had to say who we believed to be. We couldn't give him a definite at that point, so we had to say something at that point.
And having shared that death message with Colette Bell, not being 100%, but having been asked to share that message with her, why was there not then a corresponding message given to the Johnsons at that time?
I don't know.
You don't
I couldn't comment. I honestly couldn't comment on that. We were given that task to pass that death message, and then we spent 3 hours speaking to Colette, and she was great that day. I asked her numerous occasions, if you want to stop, I'm quite happily stop. But she was probably about 2 or 3 hours we sat with her after giving the death message. So I couldn't fault her that day for sitting through with us in that room with a baby and a mum. I don't know what decision was made in between that time. Could it have been passed? I don't know. I can't comment on when the confirmation was made during that time period. So I was away for about, both Andy and I were away with Colette for about 3.5 hours easily.
And so whose decision would it have been on that day about the timing of the death message to the Johnsons?
It depends who's come at the time. I think the senior investigator at the time will have been the SIO, so it'll be an inspector at the time. And I don't know who's taken over. I knew there was a super that came down. I didn't recognise it first. So I don't know what time he'd arrived and if he had indeed taken over control of the inquiry. So I don't know. I couldn't comment on that.
We may hear at some point in the hearing that there was D.I. Robson and there was Detective Superintendent Pat Campbell.
Yeah.
Do you know who the SIO was on the 3rd of May?
I believe it was Colin Robson initially, and then I briefed Pat Campbell, at the Superintendent Pat Campbell, I should say, at the Flows meeting at the end of the day. That was the only time I met him, and I didn't know if he was taking over at all. I wasn't made aware of that, and that was us terminating duty at that point.
So what time was that?
Well, probably the end of the day. It's my timings are in my statement, I'm sure, somewhere.
So I can go over that tomorrow, but if I say about 6:30 in the evening, when you had a meeting with the FLO and Pat Campbell, would that be roughly about right?
Yeah, it'll be around about that time, yeah.
So as far as you were concerned, up until that point, you thought D.I. Robson was the SIO?
Yes.
Senior Investigating Officer?
Yeah.
And it would have been his decision to decide what the death message was and when it was delivered?
Yeah, whoever is the SIO at that point. I don't know, when we'd been given that task to speak to Colette, he was the SIO at that point, so I don't know if he was relinquished from that and someone else took over, but at that point he was SIO as far as I was concerned.
We may have heard about the involvement of DS Graham Dursley at that time, involved in giving instructions and discussing the death message from Andrew.
Yeah.
And I wondered, what was your awareness of Dursley's role that day, what his responsibilities were?
I think they were both, him and Dave Robson were both working together and basically allocating the tasking from there. So basically both working together, albeit the usual routine is inspectors at SIO and then the DS allocates the jobs from there. So routinely are sometimes briefed by the DI and the DS at the same time.
Right. Okay. You mentioned earlier, I've slightly gone away from it, but you mentioned earlier that you were told to provide, when you were delivering the death message to the Johnsons, provide no more and no less. That's the words you used. Who gave you the instruction to provide no more and no less?
I'm trying to remember now, was it DS Dursley? I think it was DS Dursley had spoken to us. And that's a death message is, you can't give any more information than what you're given. As I've said before, you would like to give more in certain circumstances, but you're kind of restrained because of that investigation if you're told to give that as all you give. And certainly respect what was said earlier about two other suspects. I don't know where that's come from because we had no idea there was anybody else involved at all at that point, and obviously wasn't either.
When did D.I. Dursley, or I think he was DS then, perhaps, when did he give that instruction to provide no more, no less?
I can't remember, but he said it that day. I remember. I say it myself. I say it when I tell my cops to go and give a death message. If it's required, no more than less than what there is. Some death messages, you kind of assess on what it is. If it's a sudden death of the family that's expected, that's no issue. We're given how they were found that night, whatever. But on that day, we're told no more, no less than what we've been given. And
do you know why you're told no more, no less?
I can only assume because the investigation was still ongoing. It was still in the sort of early stages of it. Sorry, pardon me. In the early stages of it, and I can only surmise that it's probably because of that. But that wasn't my decision, so it's probably down to policy at the time.
We'll maybe need to hear other evidence about this. In the first death message that you gave to Colette Bell, for example, there was no mention of police contact.
No.
Or Sheku having come into contact with the police.
No.
Do you know why That wasn't mentioned in the first death message.
No idea. I was just told to pass that message, and that was it.
Were you told not to mention that there'd been contact with the police?
All I got was just give that as per read and nothing more. That's all we can give at the moment until we clarify ID on it as well. That was it.
How did you've talked about transparency
Yeah.
and the benefits of that.
Mhm.
You've talked about being upfront and honest.
Yeah.
You've used those words. How did you feel about being asked to pass a death message where there's no mention of the fact the police were in contact with the person?
I didn't know the full context of what had happened, what else had gone on since we first got there. So we were away at the house, so in between that time anything could have happened. So I really could only make a decision on the information that I had prior to that. If I had any more information regarding it and what had come in, then I'd probably be better placed to make a better decision, but that wasn't my decision at that time. Did it sit right with me? Probably not, because I've always been the one to give them that wee bit of comfort towards what's happened. And I can, as I said before, I can understand why they maybe retained that sort of information, but there's reasons behind that I don't know.
You said it didn't sit right with you,
No.
and that you would have given a bit more information, give the
Right.
family comfort. Do you think giving more information, it can be comforting for families in
Yeah.
your experience?
I think so. I think then lies a problem. I think that lack of information was probably where the frustration was coming from. They're saying it's not me trying to offload this onto someone else's decision, because I'm in that position now where I make that decision. So it's not an easy one. It's not took lightly. Certainly not. And there's other things that have been happening on the behind the scenes that we haven't seen. So I couldn't comment why it was withheld. From a human aspect, is it nice? No, it's not nice. But from a policing aspect, sometimes it has to be done, unfortunately.
In this particular set of circumstances, can you think of reasons why it had to be done on this occasion?
I think we didn't know the full context of what's happened. We've got at that point we now had two locuses where the deceased was, and the house where we ended up deciding that was probably the incident that started from, or whatever started, because there was a disturbance there. So they still didn't know what had happened there. So I can understand why they didn't give it, but what information is coming between that time, I don't know.
Looking back at that death message which you delivered to Colette Bell
Yeah.
on the 3rd of May, do you think that could have been done better?
From the delivery method from me, Andy and I,
I'll come to that later.
Uh-huh.
Do you think the phrasing or the actual message itself?
I think from once I passed the death message to Colette, she was distraught, and it's understandable. She just found out her partner died, and she kept saying it can't be him, it can't be him, and I had to try and explain to her this is the reasons why we believe it is him, but because the timeline between the two houses, the instance of sort of occurred very, very similar time frame. He's missing. We've seen in. It's not trying to say it wasn't exact. It was guaranteed because it was a black man and then become unconscious and transferred to the hospital and died. It was believed to be her partner at that point, and that was what was passed over. And the reasons why it was believed, it was confirmed. That she said he has a gold phone with him, and that was confirmed. That was at Locust where he was found. Lots of other strands that give the reasons to suggest quite highly that it was him. I was trying to explain that after we'd passed the death message, because the death message was very bland, and she had loads of questions that we couldn't answer. And the main one was, it's not him, it's not him. I said, look, these are the reasons why we believe it's to be him. And it was, I don't think we could have passed it any better. We tried to explain it as much as we can, especially in them sort of emotional times. Everything was going over her head. She was distraught, the baby was there. It was fortunate her mum was there with her as well, which was give us some sort of comfort.
Can I take you back before we finish today about when you go to the house of Colette Bell?
Yep.
And can you explain your understanding at that time about why you wanted to secure the house.
Yeah.
And tell us a little about that.
Okay. Can I check the drinking water first? Is that okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
please do. I'll take one as well. I also understand that, do you know that there's a transcript of what's being said prepared? And sometimes the transcriber is having difficulty picking
Okay.
up what we're saying.
Right, okay.
So I'm going to sit very close to the
Yeah.
microphone and I'm going to ask you to do the same.
Yeah.
Will you be able to do that?
Yeah, I'm fine. I don't think I get any closer. It'll be up my nose, I think.
Okay. Yeah. And I think it's late in the day and we're maybe speaking a bit quickly as well.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I've been warned.
I'll slow down.
I'll get into trouble unless we manage to
Yeah.
work this out.
Okay.
So let's go back just before we finish today and talk about going to the house of Colette Bell.
Okay.
And I'd like to know what your position was when you arrived. We've heard that 3 officers arrived.
Yep.
Yourself, Andrew Parker, and Andrew Mitchell,
Mitchell.
sorry, it's getting late.
Callum.
And Callum Clayton. 3 officers. I'm wondering why 3 officers turned up at the house. And if you can speak slowly as we go through it.
I will. I can honestly say I don't know. It might be the reason the fact that you're sent out in pairs normally for inquiry teams. It was an odd number. I'd like to think it probably had 3 because of the call that came in. So we have 2 call cards that have tenuous links between the 2 of them. A female. So if we deal with the call that we've sent to with Colette and it's individually by itself, there's a female that's rang in and found a house insecure and there's evidence of a disturbance within. I'm not trying to relate this to what's happened to Sheku. I'm trying to take this on its own as just by itself. My risk assessment is at that point, I have a female who's got a child, found the house insecure, there's a disturbance inside. I'm worrying, is anyone in that house? Do we have concerns for that? So we made immediately up the house. We got the house was locked at the time. I'm thinking, right, hang on a minute, is there anything else happening here? So we rang her, I believe, at the time, and she came within about 5 or 10 minutes with her mum. I've spoken to Colette, asking, right, you rang in regarding your house being insecure, is that right? Yeah. And she explained that her partner was missing. The house had been a mess inside, so you're quite happy for us to go in purely out of safety for yourself. As I've said before, us is to protect life. That is our job. The Section 20 of the Reform Act is protect life. We have legislation to go in that house if we need be.
Okay, you're speeding up again.
Yeah, sorry, got really excited.
So, but you're there to,
yeah.
your priority, number 1 priority is
Yeah.
protecting life.
Yes, yeah. So I had to be confident that there was no one in Colette's house because she's obviously got concerns enough to ring in the police and say my house is insecure and there's a disturbance within. So,
How did you satisfy yourself that there was no one in the house?
So I spoke to Colette. I said, are you quite happy for us to go in first? And she says, yeah, I'm fine. I said, I'm not really wanting you to go in the house with a 15-week-old child and your mum and someone's in that house. I says, because that's potentially what could be there. And it has happened in the past.
So that was a risk, a potential risk,
Yeah,
as far as you were aware.
I think the risk is obviously a risk because she's rang in. So that risk has come from her ringing the police. And we've come out to try and help with that. My concern that was someone in the house. It's potential. In the back of our minds, we're thinking, is this in relation to a male that's further down the street, which is literally a couple hundred metres away? Has this been the site of where an incident might have started? So we don't know. And as I said before, you have to have an open mind as to what's happened. Colette was quite happy with that because she had a child that didn't want to go in the house and being faced with some male that's in there, some female or whoever's in that house. So what we're going to do is we'll make sure the house is empty before you go in, so everything's safe for you. I stood with her at the doorway while I sent the other 2 DCs, one upstairs and one through the kitchen, in the living room. they cleared the house and no one was within. I was quite happy at that point. I see quite happy for us to come in and give us an explanation, a rough explanation as to what's happened. A partner had gone missing the night before and explained who he was, description of him, and showed a photograph. And that was when I fed back to DS Dursley stating potentially that this might be a link between the incident that's happened on Hayfield.
So the three of you arrive,
Yeah.
wait for Colette Bell.
Yes.
She arrives with her mum,
Yes.
Lorraine Bell, and her baby.
Yes.
And you said you waited outside
Yeah.
while the other two went in to check the house.
Yes.
How long were you outside?
Not long. The reason why I stayed outside is just provide security for her and the wee one. We didn't know who was there. There's still potential that there's people in that house. We don't know what's going to be in there, so it's an unknown risk, to be honest.
If we've heard that you went into the living room, that's not with the other two officers, that's not the case then, is it?
I honestly can't remember. I remember I had her waiting at the door to make sure she hadn't gone in, to make sure that no one was in there. I might have looked in the living room, because the living room's literally at the front door to the right as you go in. I remember it rightly. There's a straight view from the living room through the kitchen to the back door, which was open, and the living room door's to the right. I may have looked in to make sure there's no one in there, and someone's gone through the kitchen, then come back and checked the living room.
And did someone go upstairs?
Yes.
And so once you've checked, had the property checked, did you go in, all the officers go into the house at that time?
Yes, we were still within the house, and Colette was saying that she needed to feed the baby, and I said, where do you feel comfortable? So she went into the living room and got stuff for the child at that point. And that's which gives us sort of a brief sort of thing that partner had been missing since last night. His pal, his friend, I think it was that, and she'd mentioned the name Zaid at that point, saying it rang her not to go back to the house or something around that. I think it's in a statement. And she returned to the house and it had been insecure, and there was disturbance because there was stuff strewn in the kitchen and into the garden when we arrived.
And you've said the back door was open?
Yes.
And we've heard that you took her to Kirkcaldy Police Office for a statement, to give a statement.
That's correct, yes.
Was there a reason why you couldn't take the statement in her house?
And this is trying to get the right sort of order of what's happened. I spoke to DS Dursley about the sort of connections between his description. She's stating he's been missing since last night. Gold phone that she says he has on his person, which was found next to his body at Hayfield. And I said this is a suggestion that this could be one and the same man that's gone missing, her partner. At that, I was speaking to DS Dursley outside. I can't remember if he said then that he'd passed away then, and we need to try and secure the house now because there's potential point of where the incident may have started. And
So
that's
is that
why
the
we've gone
reason
back.
you
Yeah, I
wanted to
believe so,
secure
yeah,
the
yeah.
house? And that was a conversation you had with DS Dursley?
Yeah.
And what was the authority, the legal authority, on which you seized the house?
We spoke to Colette into the house, so at that point in the house wasn't an issue. I think under general seizure and the common law, we can seize any evidence, and if that's pertaining to a house, it'll be seized at that time. But obviously, if we're needing to search it, then warrants will be asked for, and more than likely granted on the back of that as well.
Did you seek a warrant for that house to be searched?
I didn't personally. I secured the house as I was directed, and that was my last time I was in the house after that.
And when you say you secured the house, what does that mean?
We basically closed the front door, back door, and put a cop on either entrance just to secure it. It's secure evidence, basically, because that is reasonable doubt. Well, I should say reasonable to suggest that that's the point of where the incident potentially happened or started.
And we've heard some evidence about a locus protection book or a scene entry log. Is that something you remember being asked to sign?
It'll be asked to have been brought down, more than likely, and we'll probably have left by that point. So routinely we'll have documented both with our operational statement that we've been in the house, so that would routinely cover that. And when the log is started, it's stored and time dated. Usually noted on your notebook if you start a log at that time, or within the start of the log, a name put on it whoever starts it. I think it was 2 community officers that came up on that day.
And was there any difficulty when you took Colette to Kirkcaldy Police Office for her mum or her baby to come with her?
No, it wasn't an issue at all. We spoke and Colette was quite, and I said, look, that's no issue at all. And I said, if you need anything for the child, that's fine. You can bring the wee one, and your mum can come as well. A mum wasn't potentially going to be a witness, so that wasn't going to impact on her giving a statement at all. So just purely for her welfare, I didn't see any reason why we couldn't. And there was none of my gaffers were contradicting that either. They were quite happy with that. So
Is this something that you discussed with your gaffers?
no, I'd made that decision myself. I don't think they would have, to be honest, when we got back, informed that we brought her up just to give her support, and they were quite happy with that. So there wasn't any issue at all.
You didn't have any concerns or try and stop her mum or her
No,
baby
I
coming?
don't think that would have been fair on her, to be honest. To say you can't bring your mum or your child, especially the fact that a 16-week-old child, and mum, it's ideal in them circumstances to have somebody like that, especially the fact that we are potentially going to pass a death message to someone. And if she sat there without a mum, I don't think that would be great, to be honest.
And is that something that was in the back of your mind already
Yeah.
when you took her
Yeah.
to Kirkcaldy?
Yeah, because I knew on the back of that we'd probably have to get movements of Sheku through that night, but what's led up to the incident. So I knew from previous experience that we're going to have to potentially get a statement if she's able to get one.
And if we haven't heard evidence from Colette Bell so far,
Okay.
but if we were to hear that she felt there was some hesitation about her mum and her baby coming with her, but she resisted,
Right.
would you remember anything along those lines?
No, definitely not. I don't think with that sort of thing, as I said before, you have to be flexible with that. And it was probably been suggested that a mum come, to be honest, if anything. Certainly from us. And definitely, if you work with Andy or I in the past, you probably couldn't get any two cops that are that helpful. We've both been in the community teams before and that. I generally think we could have suggested anything better than that to help the welfare, albeit taken to a station for a statement's not great, but we couldn't do it in that house because of potential locus. So
Okay, thank you very much. I'm conscious of the time now.
Stop there then and sit at 10 o'clock tomorrow.